Loss comes in many forms, and usually in unexpected ways. It can be devastating, leaving you facing an uphill struggle to go on with life without someone you thought would always be there. But life does go on, and even in the deepest despair, we can find hope. Welcome to Grief Relief with your hosts, Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley, brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation, helping people find hope after loss. And now here's Dr. Gloria and Dr. Heidi.
Welcome to Grief Relief. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we're going to be talking about a topic that is we know people who've had children with disabilities, and we're going to be talking about disabilities and also death today of children and other family members. And Louise Bruce, who has lost her daughter Laura and her son Chris, and started as a result of that the wonderful LaChris Connection, and she'll be talking about how she's done that. And do you want to introduce our second guest?
Sure. As you said, we'll be talking to Louise, who's lost not one but two children. And we will also be talking to Isabel Stenzel Byrnes, who lost her twin sister, Annabelle. And Isabel is a hospice social worker. She is a cystic fibrosis survivor, as was her twin sister. And she is the author of a wonderful book called The Power of Two, A Twin Triumph Over Cystic Fibrosis. Isabel discusses her process in coping with cystic fibrosis, lung transplants, and the death of her twin. And Mom, I just saw a TED Talk she did, which was absolutely fabulous, very inspiring and very powerful. And she does the work today in honor and as a tribute to her twin sister.
And also, at the end of that TED Talk, it was amazing because she actually played the bagpipes in honor of the person who gave her the organ donation, and she'll be doing that at the close of the show today. So we're excited about hearing her do that. Very inspirational. Yeah. All right, well, let's get started with talking to Louise.
Hi, Louise.
Hi, Gloria. Hi, Heidi.
So great to have you on the show today, and we're just so inspired by what you've done with the LaChris Connection and all the wonderful things that you have done. Talk a little bit about your children to begin with. They were born special needs children. Yes. I think we have a picture of Laura, your daughter that was born. Yeah, and talk about her a bit.
Oh, Laura was truly the most amazing person I've ever known. She certainly taught us what life was about in the sense of loving life and laughter, and never saw herself as limited. And that was probably the greatest inspiration.
Now, was she the first to die, or was her
Actually,
brother?
no. She was the oldest, but my son Christopher, who was 5 years younger than Laura, died at age 10 in 2004 of pneumonia. And Laura died a year and 2 weeks later of bowel obstruction. So really, both of their deaths were somewhat unrelated to their disabilities, and they were both expected to live long lives.
I was going to say, you thought they were going to live long lives.
Yes,
You didn't
that's
expect them to die
That's
in childhood.
That's correct, yeah.
And talk a little bit about having special needs children and having them die and then having another one, and born, or you were talking earlier about having two special needs children, then you had a child with no problems in between. And tell what they had and what it meant to you to then find out a second child had a
Interesting.
disability.
Yes, Laura, we knew before she was born because of her ultrasound that there was some brain damage going on there, and we always thought.
Now, this was due to a stroke in utero?
Correct. Both of the children, we didn't know at the time about Christopher, of course, but had strokes while I was pregnant. Laura earlier, probably in the first trimester, and she was born with pretty severe physical disabilities. They're both diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and she was particularly more physically disabled, weak on her left side, legally blind, had no speech, never had any speech other than the words of mama and yeah, and she certainly used those two plenty. But she had a way to work a room. It was amazing with her big, beautiful brown eyes and the sign language that she used. Wow. She just knew how to connect with people.
So she could communicate.
Oh boy, could she.
And then you had a child who was
exactly, and
then
Ben was typical. Ben was a typical child, which kind of confirmed for us that it was an incidental thing that happened with Laura. And Ben was very typical, very bright, and it wasn't. And then his little brother was 18 months younger, so they were real close. And Christopher was about 3 months old when we were on vacation in Yosemite with all our friends and family that we would invite. And amongst them were a couple of Laura's therapists who became friends of ours. And they told us at one time, we put the kids to bed and went next door for the glass of wine in their cabin. And they said, you know, you guys, we love you, but we need to tell you, we think Christopher is blind and or has similar disabilities.
Wow. How old was he at this time?
Chris was only 3 months. He was only 3 months at that time.
And at this point, you didn't know that he was blind.
That's right. That's right. I know.
Okay.
He was legally blind. He had some vision, and so I think one of the things I mentioned to you guys is that when we went through it with Laura, it was like one day at a time, and there's this naivete to be able to get excited about every new progress that she made. But when these friends told us about Christopher, all 5 years of Laura's life just flashed in my head as far as, you know, every IEP meeting, every seizure, every diaper change, you know, just everything that was involved in taking care of a special needs child. And then I went through that momentary thing of, I can't do this again kind of thing. Whereas it was with Laura, it was just, you just do what you got to do and fall in love with your kid every day. And of course that happened with Christopher too. But the first blow was, oh my gosh, I can't do this again.
So let's kind of flash forward down the road a little bit, because at that time you needed what we want to call respite. You needed rest. You needed people to help you. You needed people to take care of you. You realized how difficult it was to have special needs children, and then have a special needs child die, and then another one. And so talk about starting the LaChris Connection and what you're doing to help other people who are going through this experience.
Thanks. I love to talk about the LaChris Connection. I think that the fact that we stayed very, very active, even with our two children in special apparatus and wheelchairs and so on and so forth, that we're the ones that put together the Yosemite vacation and the big parties and the trips to the cabin, and family and friends and baseball friends and, you know, of my middle son's baseball team, they always encouraged us that, oh my gosh, you guys stay so active. We have no excuse kind of thing to not get out there and do. And so when, you know, certainly it was just unbelievably tragic losing both kids and the heavy grief that we went through. So it was a couple years before we got to this point. But after we got through some of the, you know, that shock that you go through for that first couple years, we stopped and thought about, you know, it made such a difference that we were resourceful about finding care providers. I always had babysitters around. You probably went into debt doing it, but it was so worth keeping our family active. And we thought, you know, we want to make that possible for other families. We want other families to be able to stay active and to take care of their marriages, because my husband and I would take time away, we take trips away. We had relatives and care providers that made it possible. So we decided to make it more possible for families to find care providers who love working with kids with special needs, because they're out there. They just need to find each other.
That's such an important service.
Yeah, it's really
because
fun.
the caregivers, the parents need someone to help them and to take care of them.
Exactly. One of our events that we do monthly, the last Sunday of every month in Marin County, which is, we'd like to spread it out, but right now we're in Marin. The fact that parents get there and they're there and they show up and there's 10 new care providers, and we're just even trying to get the parents to sit and relax and not think that they're the only ones that can take care of their child, whether it's, you know, autistic behaviors or physical anomalies that they're dealing with. We're just, I call it practicing respite, because just for a parent to be able to stop, and as I'm going around the room putting my hand on their shoulders telling them, sit down, we've got 10 care providers here, the doors are locked, what's going to happen? And it's actually the same thing with the process of grief, that whole thing of allowing yourself that time for yourself. It's just so important.
And it's hard to do when you have other kids, too, because you're there focusing on them. I'm sure you were always, you know, hoping that your other two children would be fine, and then, you know, when Chris died, and then when Laura died, then you're worried about your son now. So you're always giving yourself permission to stop.
We kind of had a joke in our house. We always kept the humor, no matter how great the pain. And one of them was that, okay, because Ben was always backburnered. It was just natural. He was kind of a quiet, good boy anyway. And so he was kind of in the background taking care of himself. And so we kind of teased him that when the kids died, when he was about 12 or 13, it's like, okay, now you got our undivided attention just when you need it.
Right.
Just when you want it at 13, when you're like, I don't want anything
That's
to do with mom and dad. But it really actually was wonderful to be able to give him our undivided attention at that point in his life. And it was tough for him. It was very tough.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure because he'd lost both of his siblings, and the whole family dynamic had changed.
Well, and he had already been in the situation of having 2 special needs siblings,
Right.
kind of thing. Yeah, I've always joked that some shrinks can have a good time with him because he was the middle child, and then he was like the older child because he was a caregiver to them. Then when Chris died, he was the youngest child, and now he's an only child. So yeah, he's,
You know, one of the things that I'm impressed with is that her son has moved all the way to Boston, because we find a lot of kids who have, you're in your kind of situation, feel like they have to stay home and take care of their parents. So I give
The
you a lot
parents
of
don't wanna let
credit
go.
that you're able to encourage him and that he's able to go. Because where is he going to school?
He went to Berklee College of Music, and he graduated with honors there, and now he's in LA actually doing well in the music business. It's really fun. It's really fun.
How did you do that?
You know, the hardest part about it was that we have a lot of faith and a lot of support system in our family, so it's much easier to take bold steps. But the hardest part was that, just like every child goes through so much when they're a teenager and they go 3,000 miles away home to school, that Ben also then came to the reality of what happened with his brother and sister. Because when you're 12 and 13, it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is what happens to families sometimes. And when he, you know, got to be 18, 19 years old, and he went, what the heck was that? This doesn't happen to people. So he actually was dealing with the grief of the death of his siblings and what his relationship was to them at the same time that he was going through that identity crisis. So it was very tough to let him go. You know?
Well, I want to say thank you for being on the show, and I want to say that you show how you can move on and help so much through the things that you've done with the LaChris Connection. And also, kudos to you about your son and the way he's grown up, and because I think we all do worry so much. And I'm always proud of Heidi that she's come through having the loss of a brother.
Well, and I'm thinking your son probably expresses himself through his music.
Absolutely.
We don't need
Absolutely.
to necessarily do
Like
it
chills
verbally.
when you said that.
Yeah, so the fact that
exactly.
he's a musician is just
It
a
is.
beautiful thing.
It's
And
made
like
all
my
the
mom
difference in the
said,
world.
I love what you're doing for all these families. You are giving them hope and you're giving them respite. It's so important.
Oh, cool.
And I'm sure we're going to find out our next guest is does some healing through her music too.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be talking to her right now, and we're going to introduce Isabel Stenzel Byrnes.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, welcome to the show. It's so fun to see you in person after seeing you on that wonderful TED Talk that you did.
Thank you.
All right, so you've had quite a year, gone from the power of 2 to the power of 1.
Yes.
Yeah, and having your sister pass away. Tell our audience a little bit about you and your
And
experience.
Annabelle.
And
Well,
Annabelle.
I still say I am an identical twin. My twin sister and I'm proud to say I'm 42, and when I was born, my sister had an intestinal obstruction, which is a symptom of cystic fibrosis. And so we were tested immediately and found to have CF. And at the time, my parents were told that most kids live about 10 years with CF. So that started the whole cycle of them preparing to lose us and making sure that we could have a good life and trying to instill in us an ability to enjoy every moment. And so my sister and I grew up, and with cystic fibrosis, we have to do medical treatments. And we were very disciplined with those treatments. And by the time we were 12, we started to take care of each other. And we did this chest physical therapy to help us clear our lungs. And we went in and out of the hospital throughout our lives together. So she was truly a companion through the ups and downs of life and made my illness not so difficult. But we were able to go to college, and thanks to medical care, we were able to graduate.
And you went to the same college, right?
Yes.
It was Stanford?
Stanford, right.
Yeah.
right.
Were you roommates?
Yes, we were. I mean, with some disability exception, we were able to share rooms because we had to do these treatments together. And we spent our entire lives preparing to lose one another and preparing to die. And yet we definitely also focused on hope and sort of the miracle of a future if we were going to have one.
And I'm just wondering, in preparing to die, did you also really live your life to the fullest?
Definitely,
Okay.
yes. Our intention was to never have regrets.
I love that.
And so our main priority for both of us was relationships. And you know, the one who dies with the most people at the funeral wins, right? We just learned to love openly and freely. And even just down the street from here, we volunteered for a group called Cystic Fibrosis Research Incorporated, and just found a family in our illness community that really helped us through some of the trials.
That's amazing. I feel like you, in looking at your TED Talk, you really live life to the fullest, and you appreciate it every single day, because so often we take life for granted. And I remember you saying in the TED Talk that you have lost 140 friends?
Actually, 123.
123.
Correct.
Wow, that's
Yes,
amazing.
Yes.
And that also made you close to death, didn't it? An
Exactly.
understanding of death and a more of a, I don't know, how did you approach death? How did you feel about death?
Well, I went to a cystic fibrosis summer camp growing up, and I lost many peers at the camp, but also in the hospital. And I started to realize that their story is like my story. And of course, as I matured, my initial reaction as a teenager was, oh, this is never going to happen to me, and maybe they did something wrong, but I'm going to live a long time. But as I grew up, I went through phases of thinking, well, why bother going to Stanford? Why bother doing things for the future when I don't know if I'll have a future? So I think I went through an evolution in my coping with the chronic loss. And I also feel like as a longer-term survivor with CF, I was blessed with the ability to tell people stories and to keep people alive by sharing their stories. And I feel the same way about being an organ recipient. I received a double lung transplant 10 years ago.
Wow.
And that's the only reason I'm still here. And my twin received 2 double lung transplants. So each of us received life extensions through the grace of God, really. Just three young people died in tragic accidents, and their families chose to give the gift of life. And for that reason, our family is sort of confused right now because they can't believe that both Anna and I lived as long as we have. And of course, when Anna ultimately did get cancer, and she did die in September, there was, of course, the grief and the pain and the sadness, but also the sense of gratitude that she lived 4 times as long as initially predicted.
Wow, that's amazing.
And now what's interested me too is you've always presented and things with her, and now you're moving on. You did a TED Talk with her. Now you're doing your own. Now you're coming here. I mean, what an honor to her, and how, I mean, I just give you such credit for moving on to do this. You've been with her all your life, and here you are, you know, doing this, and it just really, really very moving.
Thank you. It's not always easy, but I firmly believe in a spiritual connection, and that's how I've been with all of my friends who've died, that somehow they're still present in whatever form I believe them to be.
Yeah.
And my sister also, she would be the type to yell at me and scream at me saying, what's your problem? You've got to go and enjoy life. And so that's what I'm trying to
Live
do.
your life for both of us?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And I love today you were in a parade.
Yes, I was.
Right? Talk about that. Here you
Yeah.
are from a parade.
Well, my cystic fibrosis disease progressed quite severely, and so I went into lung failure, and I literally had hours left to live, but then I woke up.
Wow.
And I was pretty blown away that somebody had died and given me his lungs, and I could breathe. And so 2 months after my transplant, I went to the California Transplant Donor Network donor ceremony honoring organ donors. And I saw a bagpipe band, and I said, oh, I want to do that.
Wow.
And it's exactly what I pursued, and joined a band, and my lung capacity has increased 25%. And it's like my therapy, not only physically, but emotionally as well, to pay tribute to my organ donor, Xavier Cervantes.
Yeah, and I think we have a picture of him. I don't know if we can bring it up now, of Xavier. There he is.
Oh, wow, he's adorable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty powerful that his lungs are in you right now.
Yes, exactly.
That's pretty
And
amazing.
he's kind of smiling there too.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
right? He is.
It's remarkable, and a part of him is still living.
It is.
Right.
There's
It
no
is.
greater way to leave a legacy, or I guess you can say continue life
And continue
through
the
organ
bonds.
donation. Yep.
And I love the fact that you taught yourself the bagpipes. That's not easy.
Well, I went and took lessons
But
for
still,
sure.
I mean, it's amazing. You've done so much. You've just achieved. I was reading your bio and totally amazed at what you and your sister have accomplished in your 40 plus years on Earth. It was just one thing after another, and it was just it's incredible, and what you continue to do.
Thank you. Well, our book and our film is called The Power of Two, and I think we often complemented each other. If I couldn't do one thing, she would do it. And now in my new life, I'm realizing, I'm just going to have to sort of tone down what I can try to do, because I'm only one person, and I also want to be able to, take every moment as precious and not overstress myself. But I definitely do want to continue to advocate for organ donation and cystic fibrosis awareness. That's a way to pay tribute to my sister.
That's fantastic. Now, do you have any special plans coming up this summer for the?
Actually, I do. For the last 10 years, I have attended the Transplant Games of America.
Oh, wow.
And this is a gathering of over 1,000 athletes, all of whom received organs, transplanted organs. And so we physically compete. And I'm going to be swimming and racing on the track. And it's all to pay tribute to my donor, but also to show the world that organ donation works.
It really works if you're swimming and racing.
I know.
That's pretty
I was
incredible.
amazed about the lungs just work. It's an amazing thing.
It's really, I call it human resurrection, because I was very close to death, and now I have this wonderful life, and it's kind of my borrowed time. It changes my perspective about death and my own death in the future, because this has all been such a magnificent gift.
So I wanted to kind of talk with you two together now about what are you hearing here when she talks? What do you think about
You
it?
know, what struck me was one of the experiences with special needs children is always finding the balance between hope and reality, because there's that hopefulness of you just believe in your children, you fall in love with your children, and you get so excited about what they can accomplish, and you're advocates for them, and you're resourceful for them, even more so with special needs. But there's also that offset of the reality is, yes, my child does have cerebral palsy, and I really do need to get a wheelchair for them, or I'm going to break my back, kind of thing. So that juggling that hope and reality is something where you also mentioned, by the grace of God, and just the idea of faith coming into the fact that that's okay, that there is some limitations and that there is hope. And both of them just, create that understanding that we're not in control. We're ultimately not in control.
So I'm hearing a sibling here talking, and I'm hearing a mom talk. And I wondered, in looking at both of that, from a sibling point of view, what would you say to other siblings who have had a loss recently?
Well, I'm only 9 months since post-loss, so I'm still in a confusing place.
Right.
I'm not quite able to give advice at this point. I'm still trying to make sense of everything that has happened and integrate my sister's absence into my life. But I think that the sibling bond is unique because it's like being best friends with somebody. You grow up with them, you share a home, you share parents. We complain about parents together, things like that. But not having her has been very hard, but I also am just so thankful because, of course, when you're an identical twin, it's really fate that splits the zygote and makes two. And it was really the best thing that could have ever happened to me with cystic fibrosis. I think I lived as long as I did because I had a twin. And that, you know, in our family we now have an absence, but our family's style is to sort of keep mentioning my sister and keep talking about her and telling our little nieces about her and their aunties, and keep her part of the family. She'll always be part of our family.
Yeah, one of the things that I do as part of my healing is I facilitate the Compassionate Friends, which is for parents whose children have died. And I'm so heartbroken so often when I hear that in those circles of parents that their families aren't comfortable with raising the subject of the sibling or the family member who's died. And we just love to talk about Laura and Christopher, and we've set the stage for that, you know, and I know some people may be uncomfortable with it, but once we've set the stage for it, it's continued, and it's so healing. It's so healing to be able to talk about our loved ones, and to and like you said so well, that you still call yourself a twin, and that I hope that my son Ben still considers himself the brother of Laura and Christopher, both as a caregiver and as a sibling, and then that I'm still the mother of Laura and Christopher, you know, and it's still part of who we are.
Absolutely, it's our identity.
It is.
I'll always have
It
a
is.
brother,
Exactly.
even though he's not physically here.
Yep.
Like you said, he's part of my life, and I still continue bonds with him.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you both so much for being on the show today, and we're going to be excited to hear you play the bagpipes now. Fantastic, and thank you again for being on, and thanks for all the work you do. And I
Yes.
think it's so important for people to hear, even though there are disabilities and problems, that there still is hope. And you two really bring that to us, and thank you so much again
Thank
for
you
being
for
on the
having
show.
us.
Thanks,
Absolutely,
Gloria and
thank
Heidi,
you.
that you
Keep
guys
doing the
keep
work.
the hope alive by
Exactly.
doing your show. That's awesome.
And now we'll hear Isabel play the bagpipes.